Welcome to another infographic instant with Brian Michael. In this episode, we're going to be looking at whether the tide of history is tending toward integrated regulators. The infographic you see in front of you is from a larger paper which argues that the costs and benefits seem to suggest that a Twin Peaks regulatory model is the best for Hong Kong. Stepping back for a moment, we can think about regulatory structure, particularly in the financial sector, as lying along a continuum. On the one hand, you would have complete centralization of financial regulation in one consolidated regulatory organization. On the other side of the spectrum, one might see a completely decentralized model where each sector, each subject, or each institution would have its own financial regulator. And as such, a country might have, like in the US, a very large number of different regulators at various levels of government. Turning our attention now to the infographic, there are, as you see, two parts to this infographic, corresponding roughly to the two major sides of a Twin Peaks regulatory model. On the upper side of the infographic, we see institutions that typically correspond with prudential regulation, and on the lower part of the infographic, we see the trend over time for those financial regulatory institutions that tend toward financial conduct. So, looking first at the infographic above, we see that there has been a rise of partial or total integration in prudential regulation. So looking only at the infographic from 1999 to 2010, we see the percent of countries that have various models of regulatory supervision. That includes central bank integration, financial services authority integration, and partial integration. And as we see, the trend over time of roughly the last decade plus has been toward some form of integration, either partially or in the financial services authority or central bank. And on the flip side, we see that sectoral supervision has declined rather radically over the same period, from well above 40-45% down approaching 20% of countries having a sectoral supervisory structure. Turning our attention now to the lower part of the infographic, this shows the regulatory models in place for business conduct. And we see that over the last decade plus, a large, increasing proportion of countries have actually put business conduct regulation in place. So when you think about some emerging markets that haven't traditionally had very free banks or very free securities brokerage firms, we see that even those countries have started to put in place business conduct regulators. And we see the trend in general has been toward an increasing percent of countries adopting a Twin Peaks regulatory model, albeit from an extremely low base, and still there's roughly only 4 or 5 countries that either have a Twin Peaks model in place, such as the UK, or are seriously considering the adoption of a Twin Peaks model, such as in South Africa. So even though we cannot assume that a country or jurisdiction like Hong Kong needs an integrated financial regulator simply by looking at the proportion of countries adopting them, these data nevertheless do suggest that all countries need to consider adopting integrated financial regulation. Looking at other countries that are adopting it, this suggests that maybe they see something that jurisdictions like Hong Kong currently do not. This has been another infographic instant with Brian Michael.